Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Welcome to episode number 288 of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. I'm Marcy Larson, Andy's mom. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce you to Larry. Larry is Rob's dad, and on this episode, we talk a lot about the book that Larry has written. That book is titled A Space in the Heart, and it is for bereaved parents, and you will find out more information on that if you listen all the way to the end, but you can find that book on Amazon. Speaking of books, the book that I am a part of, the Threads of Gold anthology that I wrote a chapter in, was released yesterday. So if you don't have your copy yet, please get it. So go on Amazon right now. They're electronic copies, and we're trying to sell as many copies as we can to be considered a bestseller so we can put that on the sticker when the print version comes out. So again, get that. I know for the first 24 to 48 hours, so hopefully still going on right now, you can get that book for only $1.99. So rush out and get that. I do talk a little bit more about that chapter in there in the episode today. So if you want a little bit of a sneak peek, you can listen and get that as well. Also, if you want to come on the podcast and share your story, feel free to email me. Email me at Marcy, M-A-R-C-Y, at andysmom.com. I love to hear from any listener, and whether you want to be on the podcast or you don't want to be on the podcast. Email me anyway. I just get such... I feel so privileged when people write to me and tell me their own stories. So please do so. Right now, though, I just want you to sit back and enjoy listening to Larry, Rob's dad. Thank you so much, Larry, for agreeing to come on the Always Andy's Mom podcast today.
It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, you've done a few podcasts now, haven't you? So you're starting to get to be a little bit more of a pro.
I wouldn't say I'm a pro, but I have done a few.
But you've done a few now, so that's good. It's not as foreign. Sometimes I get people on and they're really nervous. I've never done one of these before. And I'd say, well, most people haven't done one of these before. It's really fine.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I always get nervous. It doesn't make a difference.
It doesn't make a difference. Okay. All right. Well, why don't you start out by just telling us all about your son, Rob?
All right. Let's see. Let's begin at the beginning.
Yeah.
We adopted Rob from birth.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Joplin, Missouri to actually adopt him. Rob was a cranky baby.
Okay.
He was a difficult toddler. He was an irascible teenager, and he became sort of a pain in the butt as an adult. And yet, I have never loved anyone the way I loved Rob. And I think it was because he needed it more than anyone I've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
And I adored him, and he made me crazy. He wreaked havoc on us. And yet, when I was with him, and it was just the two of us together, there was no one I'd rather be with.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the short version.
That is the short version.
It is. But I would have to say, and I've written about this, that the biggest regret that I have is that I wish we had more joy together. And he was very, very difficult. I mean, as it turned out, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was depressed for as long as I could remember. He became an alcoholic. So it was a lot of hard times.
Yeah.
And when I think back at the times that were joyful, it was when my kids were little.
Right.
And my wife would be out working, and I was sort of the weekend dad because she worked on the weekends, and those were the most joyful times we had together. But I wish we had more, because for the most part, when he was a teenager and adult, I would have a heart attack every time the phone rang. And finally I got that call. For the most part, particularly when Rob was a teenager and as an adult, if the phone rang, I would have a heart attack. I was always waiting for something terrible. And we had our share of terrible phone calls until we got the worst phone call.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting because we've not mentioned this yet, but you have written a book, and I've read the book, and you talking about good childhood memories. I found the story of you going to Disney to be a really funny story because you said you went to Disney and Zach, Rob's brother, was happy and smiling, and yeah, you tell the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, Zach and my ex-wife went on all the rides and they were having a great time. And Rob and I were always like watching them on the rides. He never wanted to go on any of the rides. And we have pictures of the kids at Disney, and there's only one picture of Rob eating a churro and he's smiling. The other ones, he's crying and he's been miserable. And then later on in life, when I talked about, hey, remember when we went to Disney World? He said that was the best time we ever had as a family, which
Yeah.
just always cracked me up. It's
Right.
sort of like, as kids, I guess it's also what we tell ourselves. And
Well, and then you're thinking back like this is a miserable trip. He's having a miserable time. Only Zach's having a good time. Whatever. And then
totally.
turns out in his mind it was a good time. It
Uh,
it was. It wasn't. It just wasn't what you wanted for him, right? You wanted him
Totally.
to have the beaming smiles and the excitement and all of that, those joyous looks that you expect your kids are going to have when they're having a good
Yeah, yeah.
time, but those just weren't what Rob gave you.
No, he didn't for the most part. And I just, when he was a little boy, when we went to Disney, we always thought that the thing that was troubling him was him being adopted. And we always thought like there was an abandonment issue,
Yeah.
and we always thought that was really what was making him unhappy. And I think that had something to do with it. But as I said, as he got older, we saw that there were real mental health issues
Yeah.
that we had to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole kind of nature versus nurture, right? It's there are things that are just kind of inside, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we had it. And I
Mm-hmm.
always say nature winds up kicking nurture's ass every time.
Right. Right, because you obviously did the best job you possibly could to make him a happy kid, happy healthy kid, and sometimes you just can't for all the work you
Yeah,
go through.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like we did everything we could have possibly done to make him happy, and none of it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were talking a little bit about his challenges. So he had a lot of challenges, and going into adulthood then,
He
right?
did,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And obviously, little kids, little problems,
Right.
big kids, big problems. And that's certainly what happened to us. And he was very, very self-destructive and a little on the wild side and wound up in countless car accidents. I can't tell you how many bones he broke doing crazy, wild things. And also, along with that, being an alcoholic, dabbling in drugs.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really very, very rough time. As an adult, he came out and he lived with us in Los Angeles
Right.
for a short time, and there was good and bad. The good was when it was just the two of us hanging out, but the bad was when he was out in the world and inevitably finding trouble or causing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you started to talk about, what ended up happening and that worst call and when you got that. Do you want to go into that a little bit now?
I'd been waiting for this call for the better part of 10 years, but I got a phone call that Rob had killed himself. And he shot himself. And it came as a shock, but it wasn't a surprise. He had been suicidal previously, and I had taken him to emergency rooms. We had him in and out of sober houses. It was not the first time that he tried to kill himself. And in the past, I think there would always be a cry for help. He would always he came over to my house one night in the middle of the night to say goodbye. And I knew that, I had to take him right to the emergency room. But this last time, I had lunch with him the day before he killed himself, and we went to Din Tai Fung and had our soup dumplings, which is what we would do.
It's funny because I'm mentioning this now because Larry and I were talking about soup dumplings before this because my husband Eric is currently in Los Angeles, not far from where Larry is, and he had to send me pictures of his soup dumplings. And of course, as he's sending me pictures of these soup dumplings, I'm reading about the soup dumplings that Larry and Rob ate and how that was kind of their special meal to have together.
It was.
So it was, it's just kind of ironic that Eric is out there eating soup dumplings at the same time. So
Totally crazy. We were having soup dumplings the day before he did it. And I didn't have a clue. I did not have a clue. He did not want to be saved, obviously, this time. And so, then, I got the phone call and shock, but not a surprise.
yeah.
And I wrestled with it for a short amount of time. Not to say that I wasn't devastated by it. I was, but I didn't beat myself up the way a lot of parents do. I wasn't asking the woulda, coulda, shoulda questions because I felt like as a dad, I did everything that I could have done to keep him here. And he was in so much pain and struggling with so many different things that he decided he didn't want to be here anymore. And, and I really sort of chalked that up to his mental illness.
Yeah.
And once I sort of accepted that, not that I always knew it, but Rob never acknowledged it. But once I sort of said, it was Rob's mental illness that took him, I was able to sort of let myself off the hook. And it was sort of the skeleton key that unlocked the self-inflicted wounds that I had for a short amount of time.
Well, and I think we all have that. And you talked about that in your book about how, that parents can have guilt so much of the time. And I think no matter what our child's cause of death, you have guilt. I mean, I did. I certainly, I kept thinking to myself, obviously he died when we were in a car accident on our way to a baseball game. And you think, why would you have guilt about that? But what do I think to myself? Well, what if after he came home from soccer practice, I didn't let him go upstairs and change his clothes before we left?
Mm-hmm.
What if I would have let that person bring the ticket to my house so we wouldn't have had to stop at the office to pick it up? What if, a million what ifs come into my mind that maybe we could have done things a little bit differently. So I think that's very, very natural to have that. And it lasts varying amounts of time for varying people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, I see it in the grief groups that, that I lead, where there are people that feel, I think it's about feeling the pain of the loss and holding on to that pain as a way to stay connected to their child.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that you can stay connected to your child and you don't have to have the guilt and the self-inflicted pain.
Sure. I think it's really easier, and it seems weird to other people, but it's easier as a bereaved parent to accept guilt and to think that there's something that you could have done.
Mm-hmm.
Because the alternative is to accept that you had no control over the situation whatsoever. And that can be difficult. It can be difficult to be like, I have no control over this. Because if I have no control over this, then I also have no control that my other children might not die tomorrow, or my spouse, or my sister, or whatever. All of these other catastrophes, once you admit that you didn't have control in the situation, you have to admit that you don't have control in a lot of things in your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's scary. It's scary to move on living like, oh my gosh, this could totally happen. And there's nothing really that I can do to prevent it. But if you feel like, well, if I would have done this, then Andy would be alive, or then Rob would be alive, or whoever your child is would be alive. Then you expect like, okay, I had this control. I screwed up. And this is why this happened. And so now if I'm really careful and I don't screw up in other ways in my life, then I won't have other major losses.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also think the letting go of all of that
Mm-hmm.
comes as such a relief.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in the beginning, I don't think you even know that that's an option. I think at some point in your grief, and for me, it was maybe somewhere between a year and 2 years after Rob died,
Mm-hmm.
that I just let go of all the pain. I let go of control. I let go of everything. And it was just this, like I took a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to use the word acceptance because it's not quite right,
Yeah.
but the feeling that there's nothing I could do to bring Rob back, and there was nothing that I could do to keep him here, and I just let go of all of that. It gave me a sort of a measure of peace.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it was my therapist. I remember very distinctly one day her saying to me, your pain is not what keeps Andy close. Your love to Andy is what keeps him close.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much an aha moment for me. Like it shouldn't have been, right? You feel like, oh, that's a really, really obvious statement, but it's not. It's not when you're in that. You kind of feel like I have to hang on to this sadness. I have to hang on to every little bit of it
Totally.
because that's what's keeping me close to him. And then you realize, no, that's not what keeps us close. What keeps me close is this love that does not go away. Right? The love is just there forever. That's what's holding me close. So all of this pain and anguish isn't what keeps him right in my heart.
I'm right there with you. And I say today that I have a better relationship with Rob today than I did while he was here. And what I mean by that is when he was here, we went through so much terrible shit together.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I put in my 10,000 expert hours of Rob, and I've relitigated all the terrible things that happened to all of us. And now I hold on to his essence. I hold on to all the good that is in him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I remember. And that's when I'm talking to him, that's who I'm talking to. I'm talking to his spirit and all the good. And it feels great. And I kind of like our relationship today. And I know, I'm a little facetious, but it's really true where I just hang on to the best in him.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel good. And I don't have to go back in time and relive any of the trauma because I did it. I did it. I
Yeah,
did
you
it to
lived that.
death.
Right.
And I don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
So coincidentally, tomorrow's Rob's 6-year death anniversary.
Really?
Yeah. And everyone is always like, oh, that's going to suck and that's terrible. And they're not entirely wrong.
Right.
I feel that as time has gone by, it does get easier. It's never easy. And I'll talk to my ex-wife tomorrow and I'll talk to my younger son tomorrow and we'll reminisce and we'll probably, we'll laugh. We might even cry. But there is a certain amount of acceptance and love. And it's more of like it's a day that we can remember him, but it's not like, but people who haven't gone through this, I'll hear from people who I haven't heard from a while, and they'll all be all somber and how are you doing today and all of that. And it's not like that anymore. At least for me, it's not.
Yeah.
Again, 6 years out.
Well, and I have to say, I'm 6 years out and I'm still a hot mess on that day.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just depends, right? I don't work that day. I don't have a lot of expectations on myself that day because I just feel like go back and relive it, and it's just,
Mm-hmm.
the trauma just brings me back to that moment. And And I think there's a difference too, obviously, in what happened that day and things like that.
Totally.
Obviously, I was in that car accident too, so
Mm-hmm.
there are different kinds of memories too that way. So I think it's just unique,
100%.
right? Talked about that. Everybody's grief journey is so unique.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of that, let's talk about your grief journey a little bit and what that's been like, because you've done several things. Now, we've touched on the book and we're going to get it more into the book later, but that's obviously not the first thing that you did in your grief journey.
No, the first thing I did, well, I think I did two things concurrently. I sought out a grief therapist who specialized in it, and she was fantastic. And she introduced me to EMDR therapy, which is really good for trauma.
Right.
And I'm not sure if that ever worked, but I got to give it some credit because I did it for a solid year, and I walked in as a basket case, and I walked out of there less of a basket case.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I recommend to everyone, and what I wound up doing, was joining a grief group.
Mm-hmm.
I was put on a waiting list for a couple of months, but when I finally got in there, it was a closed group, and I felt I was with my people.
Yeah.
And I had never been part of any type of group before.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't consider myself a group type of guy, of sort of a lone wolf.
Yeah.
But, when you're with your people, and this, there is an instant connection that you make with people,
Mm-hmm.
and you speak in a shorthand. And it's it's one of the most incredible benefits of this, if you can use that word, where you meet people you would not ordinarily meet in real life, and you almost are immediately connected to them, and you're sharing your most intimate details of your life and your feelings, and they get it and they understand. And these total strangers wind up becoming friends, and in some cases close friends.
Mm-hmm.
So our grief group ran for 2 years, and I really think it was fundamental in my healing. So it's the first thing I recommend to anyone who suffers a loss, if they can, get themselves to a grief group.
Well, and I think you're a great example of that, because I do love how you talked about that in the book. Like, you didn't think it was going to be for you. You didn't think this is going to be something that you would be able to appreciate, because you didn't feel like you were that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, I mean, giving it a chance is so vital, because it really is. It's just, like you said, it's just like, oh my word, these are my people. And I didn't realize they were my people. And at first, I remember the very first time I went, of course, I told you I was only 3 weeks in. So I was still in so much shock. And I remember sitting there thinking, you don't belong here. You don't belong here. This is not you. This is not happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I even had thoughts like, Andy's just at home. He's home. He's fine. Because I still couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But slowly over time, then you do realize, like, yeah, these are my people, and in my group, my original group, we had Andy died when he was 14. There was a 12-year-old, a 7-year-old, a baby, and then all the other parents, which there were like a dozen of us at least, and a lot of couples, couple moms that were there by themselves, one dad that was there by himself. Anyway, and a lot of them going up 20s, 30s, 40s. That's everybody else. They're all adults. Lost their kids as an adult. And I also remember thinking at the beginning, like, okay, I will probably be able to relate to the one who died at 12, although she had a long, complicated illness from birth, so totally different than just a 14-year-old in a car accident. Maybe I'll be able to relate to the 7-year-old, maybe the baby, but the ones who had their kids die as adult, I won't be able to relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I totally could.
Of course.
By the time these sessions go on, you realize how much you have in common altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really matter the circumstances, because your hopes and your dreams are all the same. The loss is the same. There's so many more similarities than there are differences.
100%, which is why when we do groups where I lead them, we don't do it by cause of death. We just, because it doesn't make a difference. Like
No.
we started a group last night for bereaved parents, and I mean, all horrible stories, and not one was the same story, but everyone felt the same exact emotions. And you see that in people, and that's sort of I think that's what brings you together.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that is exactly the experience.
And I found myself too. So we don't tell our stories at our support groups through Starlight. You don't tell your story on week 1. You tell your story on week 2. Week 2 is the week that you kind of go through your stories. And I remember listening to all of these stories and thinking their stories were more horrible than my story. Right? Because and I remember people coming up to me afterwards saying, "Oh my word, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That was so terrible. Yours was more horrible than mine." And I'm looking at them like, "Oh no. Yours was more horrible than mine because you know what you know, and you know what you've lived, and you have a hard time even comprehending or trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes." And for me, and for all of us, we just kept thinking, "Well, mine isn't as bad because whatever," right? I'm thinking, and mine wasn't as bad with Andy because he was a healthy kid up until that day. And yet, and I didn't have to like watch him slowly deteriorate and die. I don't know that I could have handled that. And other people are looking at me like, I had a chance to say goodbye. I knew that she was going. We had all these weeks and months and even years. You just, in a heartbeat, everything just changed. And so we both put it as the other one was worse, because you know what you know. And and you kind of accept what you have lived, but then trying to understand what somebody else is. But I'm glad it's like that. I'm glad we all were like that and not the other way, because I think you can end up being the other way, like, oh, mine was worse than yours or something, doing those kind of comparisons. But it's just so different.
Yeah, you can't compare grief.
You just can't, right? Because we were all comparing, trying to make everybody else's worse than our own. But you know what? It all's terrible. It is all terrible.
And our pain is our pain.
Right.
And and the way we loved our child is different the way someone else loved their child, but we deeply love our children, and our pain is our pain. And I would, and that's why comparing it with anything, it doesn't make a difference, because it's still ours, and it still hurts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, one of the not great things about being in a grief group is you do hear horrific stories.
Yeah.
And it's so mind-blowing. And yet at the same time, you relate because the end is the same.
Right. Well, you had mentioned that you might want to read a little section of your book. Do you want to do that now? Or maybe we should even talk about how the book came to be first and then have you read it. That's probably better.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
The book came to be in 2 parts. I was sitting in my original grief group, and I'm probably about a year in, and no lie, one of the women in the group said, "I wish there was a guide or a blueprint or some manual we can read to help navigate grief." And the light bulb went off that I must be the person to write this book. Here I'm sitting right next to her. This is a great idea.
And isn't that funny that it just comes onto you like that? Because
it really did.
For me, I'm looking for a podcast. There's got to be a podcast on grief, on parental, grief and child loss. And I'm looking. I can't find one anywhere. This is obviously back in 2019. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I guess you're supposed to start one. Like, what? What?
Totally.
So this is somewhat similar to you.
Yeah.
Like, I wish there was a guide like, okay, yeah, maybe that's me.
And also, I mean, and probably similar to you as well, I read a lot of grief books. I didn't like many of them.
Yeah.
And I did not think they were real. And I felt that I was going to write something that was really raw and honest, because I see the way we are in these groups.
Mm-hmm.
So even before I wrote the book, what I did, part of the way I grieved, was I started a blog. And every day for a year, I wrote about Rob, and I wrote his life story, and I wrote about my grief. And really, I was doing it not knowing I was going to put it in a book. I was doing it to document my feelings at the time. I wanted to have some document of how I felt a month after Rob died, 6 months, and then a year. And then at a year, I said, I'm done writing about Rob. And little did I know that was just the beginning. So I took that and I sort of used it as almost sort of the raw material that became the book. And the book is called A Space in the Heart, Survival Guide for Grieving Parents. And just to set it up a little bit, it's in three parts. And part one is the end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the end of your life as a parent to your child, and it's also the end of your child's life. Part two is the middle, and the middle is sort of the emotional journey that we all go through in processing our loss. And then part three is the beginning, and the beginning is sort of when you finally have integrated the loss into your life and you're starting the next chapter. And I believe that you become a better version of yourself, which I like to call extraordinary parents. And that's the piece that I'd like to read right now, if I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. That'd be great.
All right. I've always found it strange that there's no word for a parent who loses a child. Why do widows, widowers, and orphans get to have all the fun? I think it's time for someone to right this wrong. Bear with me for a moment as I reaffirm what you already know. Children aren't supposed to die before their parents. That's just not the way life should work. We give birth to children or adopt them. We love and nurture them. We raise them, they grow up, we grow old, and then we die. The circle of life, sunrise, sunset, rinse and repeat, choose your own metaphor. That's what every parent expects, and by and large, it's also the way things play out. Losing a child, no matter the circumstances, goes against the natural order of things. It's not part of the ordinary experience. It is something entirely different, and we become something entirely different. When your child is taken from you, you are no longer ordinary parents. Ordinary parents don't visit their child in a cemetery. Ordinary parents don't cry themselves to sleep at night. Ordinary parents don't wake up each morning knowing they'll never see their child again. We become extraordinary. We become the ones who are unlike the others. We become the newest members of the world's cruelest club, one that is already overcrowded and where the cost to join is the steepest price imaginable. We become those people, the tragic ones who are whispered about and pitied. We become the ones who are shattered, seemingly beyond repair. Remember Mary Tyler Moore and Ordinary People? That. But after a while, something strange takes place that's right out of a Marvel comic book. A metamorphosis occurs during our grief and mourning, transforming us from extraordinary to extraordinary. A lot happens when you close up the space between those two words. We are extraordinary parents, not in the sense that we are exceptionally good, which is what people usually mean when they use that adjective. But look it up and you'll find we are the very definition of the word. A, going beyond what is usual, regular, or customary. B, exceptional to a very marked extent. We are extraordinary parents who must go on living in the world with a hole in our heart. We are extraordinary parents who, in many cases, still love and care for other children. We are extraordinary parents who go to work every day and function as human beings, while most people are unaware of our secret identities. We are extraordinary parents who feel things that no ordinary parent has ever felt, and we can endure the deepest pain because that has become one of our superpowers. And that's another notable thing about us. We all have different superpowers because each of us experiences our loss in our own particular way. Some of us have an unlimited capacity for compassion and forgiveness. Some of us become impervious to pain. Some of us are masters of disguise. Some of us can turn to stone. Some of us can become invisible. And then there are those of us who can open up and share it with the world. We walk among you. We are your friends and neighbors, your coworkers, the quiet couple who sat at the table next to you in a restaurant last night. We are the extraordinary parents, and we don't mind if you want to call us by our first name.
I absolutely love that. I think it was my favorite chapter in the whole book, to be honest. It's just beautiful.
One of mine too.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, it is beautiful, and it does transform us to be different people. I mean, I think about that a lot, actually,
Mm-hmm.
about how these individual stories kind of change us all. And, for me, I do understand pain in a way that I couldn't have understood it before. Right. And in my job as a pediatrician, I feel like I can understand anxiety and depression and mental illness in a whole different way, having lived in that deep, dark grief that I just wouldn't have been able to understand or wasn't able to understand before that happened to me.
Mm-hmm. I know. I
Mm-hmm.
know. But the transformation is, for me, the most remarkable thing of all. And what led me into becoming sort of a group leader and a grief coach, because witnessing the transformation, watching people have the spark come back into their eyes, and playing a small part in that is just the most mind-blowing, the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. And in a million years, I never saw myself doing any of this.
Yeah.
I wrote about it, but it's like I was not a servicey type of guy, because I was in service to Rob.
Yeah.
I was in service to him for as long as he lived. And I really didn't know what I would get out of it. And to this day, it sounds weird, but I feel I get more out of helping other bereaved parents
Mm-hmm.
than they get from me.
Yeah.
And it's just an honor and a privilege to play such a small part in helping them sort of come back to life to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's just beautiful. And I completely agree with that and understand that a lot. I always think about my old pastor that has since retired, but he also always used to say when a member of our congregation died, he would send out an email announcing that they had died, and he would say, "It's my honor and privilege. It's my privilege to announce this because that is it. It is a privilege to go into someone's deep dark pain and walk through it with
Mm-hmm.
them for a time." And I feel too that every week when I help someone tell their story, it's a privilege that I get to walk with them for just an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you doing grief coaching, it's longer with us both facilitating support groups like we do. Those end up being longer, but you're right. You end up seeing transformations in people, and it's beautiful. And what's funny too is I think an important thing that people need to know is that when you undergo this transformation, you're not going to look the same. You weren't the same. You're not going to
Mm-hmm.
get back to that person who you were. But that person can still be just beautiful and amazing. It's just beautiful and amazing in a different way. And you might not want to think that you're more beautiful or amazing, and that's fine. But, I feel like I probably am a better person now than I was, even though I take
Mm-hmm.
Andy back in a heartbeat. And that can be hard to take. I mean, that took me a
Yeah.
long time to accept that. I did not want to be a better person after Andy died. Because
Of
somehow
course.
then I felt like that made it worth it or something. And obviously it doesn't. It doesn't make it worth it. But in spite of that, in spite of all of this horribleness, I can be better and I can be more
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And that's, I think, goes along so much with that chapter in your story of going from being an ordinary parent to an extraordinary parent and an ordinary person to an extraordinary person.
hmm We are. And what I like to say about that is we're the last people that see that we're extraordinary. Everyone we know has seen our transformation. We're the last to know that we're extraordinary.
Hmm.
And then when you finally sort of embrace it, it sort of makes sense. And particularly as the years go by, I feel like, we're sort of, I was gonna say we get better, but I think there's more of like an acceptance of it. And this is like it's integrating your grief. It's your grief becomes a part of you. And I like to say, I started out with a hole in my heart, but I feel that my heart's sort of healed. And I know like most people can't get their head around that, but I feel like my heart is healed and I am better for it because I went through the worst thing and I came out transformed.
Hmm.
But I always say, Rob's still in my heart.
Yeah.
He's always going to be there. And I believe that. And I even like I do book readings and things like that. And I like to say to people, like, you can't see him, but he's right here. He's right here with me.
Mhm.
And I carry him always. And yeah, and it just feels good.
Well, and you obviously just released your book, and I have a chapter in a book that I'm part of, and an anthology. And to give you all a little bit of a heads up, my chapter goes very much into this. This is why it's very timely to talk to you because my chapter talks about how you cannot see someone's story from the outside. You don't know
hmm
what their story is and how our stories are all individual. And actually, I talk about an experience I had just being in a store and looking at a mom, and I was looking at this mom with her three kids, and I was instantly jealous of her and her three kids, and thinking to myself, what would you do if your middle one was suddenly gone? And then it hit me, like just a ton of bricks just hit me right then, that I have no idea that there didn't used to be four. I had no idea. Like,
hmm
I just saw her in there shopping with her three kids. She sees me shopping with my two. She doesn't know that my heart's broken. She doesn't
Yeah.
know. So that means that anyone in that store could have been going through this horrible experience and they don't know it. And then I go on and talk about that, how really it's come, that realization can end up making you so much more of a compassionate person, because now you look at other people and think, what could their pain be? What is their pain
hmm
today? And when you look at them in that way, trying to understand their pain and be there to support them, it just changes everything.
Absolutely. No, that's beautifully said.
So anyway, I felt like those though our chapters, that chapter that you read and this chapter that I wrote, were very, very similar, had a very similar vibe. So when you told me you wanted to read that one, I thought, oh, this is perfect for us to discuss, because I could talk about this topic all day.
Yeah, no, it's like I agree. It's really my favorite piece of writing because I do think that I think most bereaved parents don't see themselves that way.
Yeah.
And it's not until you've been through it and however you got through it, if you went through a grief group or if you had a grief therapist, but it's not until you sort of get to the quote unquote other side of it
Yeah.
that you can see that you've been through, not that you've been through a lot, but you have thoroughly changed and you're not the same person. You can't possibly be the same person. But I mean, I have a lot of friends who have lost a child just because of the circles that I travel in.
Right. Right.
And
Me too.
and yeah, and I see they are better people. They're more highly evolved. They're certainly more empathetic. Uh,
And they don't sweat the small stuff, right?
never, never.
No.
But more than anything, the thing I said before, we are so connected, and it's a connection that I have best friends who are both childless, and I love them. They are my best friends in the world. but I have a different connection with people who have lost a child. I particularly have very, very strong connections to fathers who have lost a child, a son, to suicide,
Sure.
they were in my groups all the time, and I feel for everyone in the group. But I have such an affinity for that person because I've walked a couple of miles in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But that connection is so intense. It's really it's almost indescribable, I think. It's just such a I've never felt that way with anybody before. That type of connection is very, very distinct.
Well, I 100% agree. And it's funny because, my support groups now are done virtually. So I have people from, well, all around the world now because we've got some participants in Australia um, so anyway, I feel so incredibly close to them.
Hmm.
Right? So I have something like a good friend of mine and they had underwent another tragedy and I would tell someone at work, like, oh, my good friend, just had this happen. And I've had several experiences where they've had something really horrible happen. And they, of course, think that it's someone local, right? Because it's someone that I
Hmm.
consider a very, very close friend. And like, oh, no, actually, she doesn't even live in this state. It's not even at all close. But yeah, I feel it even more so than if it was my neighbor
Hmm.
because the connection that I have with these people is just so much deeper, such on a deeper level.
So much is, and it's incredible. I grief coach one-on-one, particularly guys. And I find more often than not, we become really close friends. And we start off the relationship where I am sort of just walking them through, I'm listening, I'm normalizing to them. But because it's such an intimate relationship, uh, friendships develop,
Sure.
which does not happen when you're going to a psychiatrist or a therapist.
Yeah, professional therapist. Right.
I can't tell you how many friends I have now who have gone through this, who we just started out as, Larry, grief coach, and,
Yeah.
Steve, bereaved parent. And we become really, really close friends. And when we talk, we don't always talk about, the reason that brought us together.
Yeah.
We're just shooting the shit and we're talking about, a basketball game or something like that. But it's just incredible to me how, and also one of the wonderful things, and I think I mentioned this to you, but it's so true. You meet the most amazing people in this terrible little community that we all live in. But there are amazing people, and it's also one of the great things about this, even though the worst
Right.
thing has
Right.
happened.
But those people bless us,
They sure do.
right? We're blessed by them. I mean, I can't even imagine my life without some of those people in it now.
I
I mean,
know,
they're
I
just
know.
so, so precious to me.
Me too.
Yeah, and we've met like some of them, well, many of them now I've met in person. And what's funny is I feel like I meet them in person, I can just like, hug you. And some people are not even people that I've been in grief group with. I've got a mom that I'm thinking of right now. We just have only emailed back and forth.
Hmm.
We've emailed back and forth. She did an interview on here, but yet I feel like if I headed out, she lives in Oregon. If I headed out to Oregon tomorrow, I would give her the biggest hug and we could just totally hang out for the day and be fine. And feel like I'm just with my close friend.
I know. It's an amazing thing.
And the only thing we've had is 1 hour on Zoom and probably 15 or 20 emails. That's it. But yet she's my people, like you had said earlier.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when they're
no,
your
it's
people, they're
it's
your people. They get you and you get them.
hmm
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that we're talking about the good that comes out of this
Right.
because, we start out where this is the worst thing that has happened to us. And we're so hopeless and we're just in the dark for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do get through it and the journey through it, you start seeing rays of light, and then there is sort of a return to joy. And and again, in the beginning, you can't see any of it.
No.
You can't see any of it at all.
Well, and all that being said, I'm glad you brought that up because we are talking about all the kind of good parts, but it's messy and it's horrible,
The worst.
right? It's messy and horrible. And let me just tell you, so I'm 6.5 years out, so even a little bit further out than you. Last week was a cruddy week for me. I had 3 horrible nightmares about Andy dying and my whole family dying. It was just terrible. I still occasionally see my therapist about once a month to every 6 weeks or so. I had to do EMDR with my therapist today because I really was bad. And I found that this week my anxiety crept up to levels that it hadn't been in a while. I think because of all those dreams. I told you my husband's out of town in Los Angeles for a week, so I'm totally by myself. So, those things can creep up and get back up and affect you long term. So I don't want anyone to feel like they listen to this and like, gosh, Larry and Marcy, you've made this sound really easy and really simple. And now you're like on this other side and things are all rosy and great. Totally not true. Okay.
I agree.
I've cried 3 or 4 times in this interview. I've cried many more times than that today because I had my therapy today. So don't let this dissuade you from thinking that it's not still hard and that things can't still be hard, because there are still really, really hard days and grief is still really, really messy. But we just wanted to take some time and talk about the beauty that can come. Right?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you put that in perspective. And like I said, tomorrow is the anniversary of losing Rob.
And guess what? It's probably going to be a really cruddy day in general. Like, it's not going to be happy.
It is not happy.
You might get through it and it's not going to be as sad as it's been in the past, but it's not going to be a happy day.
Nope, it's not something that you celebrate.
No.
I generally listen to I don't know if you know the artist Mac Miller. I listened to his album that came out right after Rob died, and Rob loved him, and it is a very sad and beautiful rap album.
Okay.
And I listen to it every year, and it makes me cry every year.
Right.
I feel the connection intensely, and I feel like I'm listening to it with Rob.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I would say if you look at it from a just big picture perspective, I do feel like I have gone through it and I'm a better person. But I can be watching TV and there's something that will trigger me. And I write about it in the book, where I don't know if you watch The Bear, which is great show, but
No, I never have, but yeah.
Oh, well, it's intense. But anyway, just seeing the look on one of the actors' faces, I go, oh, that's Rob. So, and I'll start to cry. I'm an easy cry, so that's also, I guess, a good thing.
No, I think so too. But I'm glad we did talk about that too, because again, and that's when you talked about too at the beginning how you didn't like many of the grief books that you had read before, and I'm with you. I mean, some are beautiful and really touch me in a good way. And others, I mean, there have been some that I've been in a bereaved women's group and we started a book study and we actually quit the book halfway through because we all hated it so much.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of books that either they're written by someone who really doesn't not have personal experience in grief and we're just like a grief counselor or something. And I feel like they do it in too academic of a way, or they try to wrap it up a little too pretty.
Yeah, it's like a Pollyanna.
Yeah, and they're at the very end, and like you go through all of these things, and you're going to end up just great. And I feel like we did that a little bit. But we also talked about how though it's messy. It's messy in the middle, and it's still messy times even when you get later in your journey. It's not always just neat and beautiful and wonderful. There are tough days and hard days and beautiful days and everything in between. And you also talked in the book about feeling all of those emotions all at the same time,
all at the same time, which
Mhm.
is also something that, before that was not my experience. And yet, we hear it all the time. And certainly, it's complicated and you feel, sad and angry and lonely and whatever it is you're feeling. And it's very confusing in the beginning because you've never felt like this before.
Mhm.
And then you can also feel numb and then you're just putting it all aside. But I just feel like there's no stages of grief. It's sort
Yeah.
of it all hits you all at once. And one day it's all shitty, and then the next day it's a little less shitty, and then it's being on the roller coaster. And it's totally normal to feel everything, even though it's conflicting and it's confusing, but that's grief.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing Rob with us. Why don't you tell people how they can get your book again and how they might want to get in touch with you, either as like a grief
Yeah.
coach or through the support groups that you're doing, just some of that contact information.
Yes. So let's see. The first thing is you can get the book at Amazon or Audible. I suggest Audible because I read it and I find it's a much more intimate experience.
Uh-huh. I have to say, I loved reading that chapter. It was really one of my favorite chapters. But having you read it was a totally different experience. I really did like it better. So I would 100% agree with that. 100% agree.
It's a very, very intimate thing.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of grief coaching, you can go to griefforguys.com. And I don't just grief coach guys, but I just felt I started it because I noticed in our grief groups, it was sort of 90% women.
Mm-hmm.
And the one or two guys that were there reluctantly and not very, and they weren't sharing. So I started this website called Grief for Guys, but I grief coach both men and women. And then I really love talking to readers. So if people want to reach out, my email is my name, lcarlat, CARLAT @gmail.com. And I've had some of the most amazing, meaningful experiences with people who've read the book. So I'm always up for that.
Mm-hmm. I love that too. I love that too. And then those support groups. What are those support groups through?
So I work at a place called Our House Support Grief Center in Los Angeles. I wish
Mm-hmm.
that this place was in way more cities,
Yeah.
but if you're in Los Angeles, they do amazing work
Look it up.
and certainly look it up.
All right. Well, thank you again, Larry. Again, I really, really enjoyed hearing about Rob and talking to you.
No, this was my pleasure. Thanks, Marcy.
Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful and would like to support the podcast, please leave a 5-star rating and comment. To help financially, you can type Andy's Mom, one word, to the number 53555. This provides a link to GiveButter, which allows donations through PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay, or credit cards. GiveButter will provide a receipt of your tax-deductible donation, or you can visit the donation page at andysmom.com/donate. Always Andy's Mom is a registered 501c3 and can receive donations through Thrivent Financial and Benevity. Marcy loves hearing from listeners. Please feel free to reach out to her via email at marcy@andysmom.com or on the Instagram or Facebook Always Andy's Mom accounts. Sign up for the email list to get weekly episode links as well as pictures of Marcy's guests and their children. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.